Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, I wanted to kind of target the beginners out there, people that are interested in makeup but maybe a little bit intimidated. So I wanted to ease into this nice glam soft look, and I hope this is something you're interested in, and please keep on watching. Okay, you guys, and the first thing we're going to start out by doing is priming our eyelids, and I do this whether I do a dramatic eye or not. I always start out by priming my eyelids, and if you've seen my videos before, you know that I always do this, and I think it's very important, especially when you're starting out with makeup, just because it's going to make the eyeshadow apply so much better, so much smoother, and it's just going to be easier to work with. So I do think that it doesn't matter how much eyeshadow you apply, it's very important to start out by priming your eyelids. So that's what we're going to do now. This one is by Too Faced, and this is my personal favorite. I'm not really going to go into detail with products and stuff like that in this video, because you go ahead and you use whatever you have. And if you're new to makeup and you don't want to spend a lot of money, you can also just use a concealer and set it with powder. It works just as well. I'm going to go ahead and apply my Too Faced Shadow Insurance Eyeshadow Primer, and I do that just using my pinky. I squeeze out a little bit like that, and I apply it using my pinky like that. You really want to make sure that you get, especially in the middle, because that's where you have all the creases, where your eye opens up. And take your time with it. Make sure you don't apply too much. Make sure it's nice and dry. I usually apply it with my pinky, and then I go over it with a clean finger to just take away some of the excess product, and also just to tap it down dry like that. And then to set it, you can use an eyeshadow that's close to your skin color or translucent powder, as I'm doing right now. I personally like to go in and set my primer using translucent powder, but if you don't have translucent powder, you go ahead and you apply an eyeshadow. It works just as fine. There you go. And it basically just creates like a clean canvas. Your eyelids are nice and primed and ready to go in and start on some coloring. So now that our eyelids are nice and primed, I just wanted to touch on two subjects really quick before applying the eyeshadow. I just wanted to mention that I do think it is important to have a few good eyeshadow brushes available, because it does make a difference when you're using good brushes. Of course, you go ahead and use any eyeshadow palette that you have at home. I do suggest that you go in with a rather neutral palette just to start out with, because we do see like really glamorous looks with crazy colors or exciting colors, and it does look good. But the fact of the matter is, it's not super wearable. We see it on Instagram and it looks good, but there's a certain occasion that applies for that, and this is not one of them. So I do suggest that you start out by using a rather natural palette. Of course, you can use any palette that you have at home. I do also want to just touch on really quickly how important I think that eyeshadow palettes can be. Now, that doesn't mean that they has to be the most expensive palette out there, but I definitely think that if you don't do a lot of makeup, or if you do very natural looks, that get one good palette that you can bring everywhere. I definitely suggest by Anastasia. I love their Soft Glam and also their Renaissance palette. I think these are super natural, and also I think that these are great for beginners because the shadows are amazing. These are honestly my favorite palettes to work with. I also really like the Morphe eyeshadow palettes, and you get probably triple the amount, but they aren't very travel friendly. So if you're new to makeup and you find a look that works for you, I suggest you get a good eyeshadow palette, and also one that is not too big that you can actually travel with, because I know for those of you who don't do a lot of makeup, you're not going to bring like 3 different eyeshadow palettes to work with. So these are just a few of my recommendations. They have great drugstore ones as well. I know that NYX makes a few eyeshadow palettes that I personally love, but go on the website if you do that, because they have a wider range of eyeshadow palettes available there. I'm going to be working with the Anastasia Beverly Hills Soft Glam eyeshadow palette today, because it's super natural and super easy to work with, and I love these shadows. These are some of my favorite eyeshadow palettes that I own. In this video, we're going to keep the eyeshadows very minimal and very easy to do, but it is important, like I said in the beginning, that you have a nice brush to work with. Especially, I think this is probably the most important brush when you're starting out, and that's the crease brush. And you want to go in with a nice fluffy brush such as this one. This one is the Sigma E40, and as you guys can tell, this is just a fluffy synthetic brush, and I have a couple of them. I have a lot of them actually. Let me just show you guys a few examples of brushes that I like to go in with first. Here are just a few that you can see. These are by different brands. It doesn't really matter which ones you use. I just personally love the Sigma and the Morphe ones. These are actually by ColourPop, and they just came out with new brushes, and I like those as well, and they're super affordable. But this type of brush is what I always go in with first. Just a nice fluffy brush, and I'm gonna use my Sigma today, my Sigma E40. I'm not gonna go into detail with all the shadows I'm using, the name and everything like that, because it doesn't really matter. I just want you to use whatever you have at home that you're comfortable with. These are just a few of my suggestions. The first thing that I almost always do, also when I do a very dramatic look, I still go in with a very natural shade in my crease to begin with, because I just like that gradual fade that it gives you. So I always go in with a very natural shade in my crease to begin with. I dip it in, and this one you don't have to worry. You can be as messy or as precise as you like. But again, we're using that fluffy brush, so this is not necessarily precision work. This is just to get a nice transition in that crease. It's going to create a little depth to your eyelid. And just make sure that it's nice and blended. Don't just put it in there and leave it like that. Take your time. It does make a big difference when you blend it out nicely. You don't want any harsh lines. And I apply this up close, not all the way to my brow, but almost. And in my crease and down on my lid just a little bit. And you can see the difference. It already created a little bit of dimension, a little bit of depth to your eyelid. And we are gonna, of course, repeat that step to the other eye. And then for the next step, I like to either use the same brush, or you can use one that's basically the same brush, just a little bit smaller. And this is the Sigma E38. And you can see that they're very alike. This one is just a little bit smaller. So I'm gonna go ahead and use the Sigma E38. And I'm now gonna dip into a shadow that's a little bit deeper than the one I'm wearing all over my lid. And I'm just doing that very light. And I'm leaving that almost in the same spot. I'm just not dragging it up as high. I'm just leaving it right here in the crease. I'm dragging it out to the corner just a little bit as well. And again, just take your time. Don't rush it. Blend it out. And then I just go back over it with the other brush, the E40, just to make sure there aren't any harsh lines. And then for my lid shadow, I like to use my pinky. It goes on a little bit more natural. It doesn't have the same effect as if you're using a brush and you wet it. That looks great for certain looks, but when you want to keep it more natural, just use your pinky and go in with like a light champagne, like a light shimmer, and you dip it into your shadow. And then I just apply it to my lid using my finger. And we put this all over the lid. And for the outer corner, just to deepen it up a little bit, I am dipping in to, again, a deeper brown, one that complements the other shadows that we used in the lid. And I am leaving that right there on the outer corner, really close to the lash line. And I'm not really dragging it in much. I'm really just focusing on deepening in, I am really just focusing on deepening up the outer corner. Again, with darker colors, go in with a light hand, build it up if you want a little bit of a darker look, but don't go in too heavy-handed. It can be very hard to blend out. There you go. And that's about it. And of course, I'm just gonna go back over it with that same brush we started out with. I basically do that after every step. After each new eyeshadow I lay down, I just go over it with the brush we started out with. And because we're keeping this look very minimal and beginner friendly, we're gonna go ahead and skip eyeliner and eyelashes altogether. I do think that I love, personally, everybody knows, I love to wear eyelashes, and I always apply a little bit of liner before I do. But I think when you're going very natural, I mean, eyeliner and eyelashes can definitely be very intimidating, and especially now everybody wants to do that winged liner, and it is very hard to do. And I have to say that it doesn't even look good on everybody. Everybody's just doing it now because it's a trend, but it doesn't complement every eye eye shape. And because we're skipping eyelashes today, I definitely want to emphasize our natural eyelashes and definitely make them pop and take a little extra time applying your mascara. So the most important step in my opinion when I'm not wearing false eyelashes is to curl my natural eyelashes. And this one I think is by e.l.f. So this is a drugstore curler. You can use any curler, but I honestly have a lot of them and I tend to always grab this one, and I believe it's like less than $5. And I take my eyelash curler, so I curl it as close to the lash line as possible, give it a few squeezes, and then I go ahead and I apply a generous amount of mascara. I always do a quick first coat and then I let it sit for a little bit, and then I apply the second coat. Once the other mascara is a little bit tackier, it just grabs on nicer and it makes it nice and black. So that's what we're gonna go ahead and do now to the upper lashes. We're gonna give it a nice coat of mascara, or two, or maybe three, but please take your time with it. Even separate them, take your time and make your eyelashes look nice and thick and voluminous, because sometimes we tend to just rush it, and if you do take a little extra time, I think it does make a big difference. So since we're not doing eyeliner or false lashes today, I'm definitely going to take my time on my eyelashes. So I'm going to go ahead and apply the first coat. And I like to go from the back as well. This next step is obviously optional as well. I just personally like to separate my lashes using a tweezer. Just gives you a little bit more control, and you can actually put your eyelashes where you want them to be versus all of them just sticking together in one spot. And it's obviously also going to create a fuller look. Honestly, it takes another 2 minutes, that's it, but it does make a huge difference. So if you do have the time, I suggest you try it out. Make sure you don't neglect your outer lashes, because those are your longest ones. So it's important that you just get in there. Okay, you guys, and now that we have applied a nice coat of mascara, or two, or maybe even three, we're gonna move on to the face. We're still gonna do a full face glam look. We're just not gonna go as heavy, but I always like to start out by priming my face before I go in with foundation. And I like this because I tend to have drier skin in certain areas, especially on my cheek area. So I personally like to apply a moisturizing, hydrating primer. Again, this is up to you. You use whatever is better for your skin. Some people have more oily skin, some people have combination skin, so use a primer of your preference. But definitely I think it's an important step not to leave out your primer before you go in with your foundation. And for foundation, I'm actually using a drugstore foundation. This is by the brand Physicians Formula. This has to be one of my favorite, if not my actual favorite drugstore foundation. It is so good, I love it, especially on days where I don't want too heavy of a coat, too full coverage. I would say this one is a nice medium coverage that you can definitely build up if you want more coverage. It might look like I'm applying a lot, but it's really not, because it is pretty sheer. I add a little bit to my forehead. And in my opinion, I think a sponge is the best way to go, especially if you're newer to makeup. There are very good foundation brushes as well. I just personally love using a sponge regardless of what type of look I do. I just think it's so much easier. It blends it out more effortlessly. Yeah. But again, especially if you are new to makeup and starting out with makeup, I think it is easier because it doesn't leave you with those harsh lines. There are definitely brushes that go really nice with full coverage foundations, but if it's not applied correctly, I think it can make your foundation look super streaky. So in general, I would say 95% of the time that I apply my foundation, I use a brush. There are a few foundations where I do use a, I said a brush? No, a sponge. 95% I use a sponge. Very few foundations where I use a brush. So yeah, I suggest using a sponge. And again, this one is by Real Techniques, I believe. I get it at Ulta. It is, I think, $6 a sponge. You don't have to buy a beauty blender. That's $20. Don't get me wrong, beauty blenders are great. But I definitely think that there are sponges out there that give you, or that do the same job, if not better, for $6 or $5 or whatever it is. So you by no means have to buy a beauty blender. I rarely actually use my actual beauty blenders. I prefer other sponges over the Beauty Blender. Just make sure that you go really into the hairline. Make sure that's nice and blended. You go over your ear right here and definitely under your neck so we don't have any of those lines. And again, with your sponge, it's so much easier to go over it. And for my concealer today, I'm also using a drugstore concealer. This is the Maybelline Fit Me Concealer. It is a great concealer. It's one of my favorites, honestly. And I go ahead and I just apply a little bit, especially to this area right here because I tend to be a little bit red. In general, I don't like to apply too much concealer. Sometimes when you see the videos, they have like the whole area full of concealer, and I just find it to be way too much. And once you blend it out, it's very hard to blend out, so you just end up with like almost a cakey looking under eye, and I definitely don't like that. I don't think that's ever cute. And I'm gonna go ahead and use the same sponge for my concealer as I did on my foundation, and we're gonna blend that out. And again, I like to just drag it down a little bit because I tend to get a little bit red around this area right here. And then I flip it around to kind of like soak up the rest of the product because I don't like to have too much concealer on. And then I sometimes just go over this area in here with my finger. And I know that there are very few of you that might be able to get away with not setting your under eye. I always set my under eye. I have to. Otherwise, it definitely gets greasy throughout the day. So I suggest you always set your concealer. There are very few concealers where you can get away with not setting it, but in general, always set your concealer in place. And we're gonna do that using that same translucent powder as I did on my eyelids, or whatever you have at home. I definitely recommend setting your under eye with a translucent powder. You can also use a face powder. They just tend to have a little bit of color in them and might be a little bit heavier. I like a light powder, and I don't like to bake, so we're not gonna do any of that today. We're not gonna bake or anything like that. So I take the translucent powder and I just go over my under eye to make sure that my concealer is set in place so it's not gonna move throughout the day. And now that our under eyes have been set in place, we can continue on with a little bit of eyeshadow underneath the lid. And also, one thing I quickly wanted to mention when working obviously with mascara, if you do mess up, which we do a lot of times, like we get the mascara on the top or on the bottom, just let it sit, finish off your entire makeup, and then at the end, when it's been sitting for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or however long, you go over it with a Q-tip and you can just kind of like brush it away. Don't try to brush it away using a Q-tip right away because the mascara is still wet and tacky and it's just gonna smudge all over your lid. Just let it sit, wait, and we're gonna take care of that at the end. So even though this is a very minimal look, we don't wanna leave the under eye completely bare. So I'm just tapping into those two crease colors and I'm mixing them. I'm tapping into that and I'm leaving that on the bottom like that, using a smaller brush, a more precise brush. And then on the outer corner, we're just dipping into that darker shade and we're leaving that right there. I do apologize. I know I had my AC on. I forgot to turn it off, but it's really hot in New York City. It is still, I think today is going to be about 90 degrees. So it's really hot, especially when you're applying makeup and you have all of these lights. So I do apologize for the noisy background, but that is why. Anyhow, now that we're done on the under eyes, let's go ahead and give our bottom lashes a coat or two of mascara. And I'm obviously using the same mascara, and I'm also separating those a little bit with my tweezer. And I'm gonna try to be very careful, obviously, and not mess up. But like I said, if we do, don't worry about it. Let it sit there, and we're gonna take care of that at the end. And now that we're completely done with the eyes, we're gonna continue on to the face. So I always set my foundation in place as well. It also depends on what foundation you're using. Some of them may have a matte finish and you don't need to set them. Mine usually are a hydrating, dewier foundation, so I always set mine in place. And I use the same translucent powder again, and I use that on a fluffy brush like this one. And I like to just kind of go over it lightly, and obviously not too much. You can see right there, just kind of dispense and distribute the powder, and then I kind of go over it and I tap it in, almost pressing it into the skin, just to give it a nice matte finish so you don't look so shiny. And also this way it's gonna make your bronzer and blush, if you choose to obviously wear that as well, go over top of it much easier, much nicer. And in this video, we're definitely going to skip contouring just because I know that everybody's talking about contouring and it is fun to do, but it can also be a little bit intimidating. So I think you can ease into contouring using just bronzer and just bronze up your face, because right now we're looking a little one-dimensional, a little bit flat. So what bronzer will do is obviously bronze up your face, and it's also going to soften it up a little bit, and you can create a soft contour line with your bronzer as well. So grab whatever bronzer you love, and I use this fluffy brush by Morphe that's a little bit tapered, therefore a little bit more precise. This is the Morphe R2. This is my favorite bronzer brush, and I then start by laying down my bronzer right here in that hollow of the cheek right there. And again, this is not a contour per se, but I like to place most of the bronzer right there and then kind of like buff it out like that. And of course to the other side as well, right there in the hollows. I like to swirl it around. And don't worry if you get a little carried away, because I tend to do that with my bronzer, or a little bit messy, because we will clean that up, because I always do that. No matter how much makeup I apply or not. I always go up to a little bit in the temples, to the forehead, like that, to bronze it all up. Lay it down on the perimeters of your face. I personally love coral blushes, and also because I think it goes with every look and also complements almost every skin type. So I like to go in with a coral type blush, and I like to lay that right here, make that face to get the apples to kind of like pop out, if you will. I don't know how to explain it. And then I drag it up like that. And the same over here. And what we're gonna do now is use the same sponge that we use for our foundation and concealer, and mine actually has an ankle right here, which is why I love this sponge so much. But you can use this ankle as well if you're using a regular beauty blender or whatever sponge you have. Most of them, they come with that tip right there. So I dip this part in to my translucent powder, and I drag it up this way, and I go down. And what this does is just clean up this mess right here. If you got a little carried away, like I said, or a little messy looking, this will just, we're gonna let this sit there for a little bit, and then once we dust it off, it's just gonna create a nice clean line, if you will. So this way your bronzer and blush is just nice and clean looking. So while we let this sit there to bake for about 5 minutes or so, I'm gonna continue on using, of course, my favorite part, but because it also means that we are done, we're gonna be using some highlighter. And like I said before, this video is not gonna be about specific products. I am, however, just gonna mention this because I think it's such a great highlighter for everybody. It complements every skin type. It is by Essence, so it's a drugstore highlighter, and I swear to God, this is one of my favorite, if not my favorite highlighter of all time. And this highlighter, I believe, is about $5 or $6, and you can get it at Ulta, or at least on Ulta.com. I love this highlighter, and I highly recommend it, especially if you're new to the whole highlighter game and you want to just ease into it. This is the perfect highlighter for that. It is so natural and so subtle, because all we see on the internet right now is highlighter, the beaming highlight, the glow, all of that, and it is beautiful, but you know, certain highlighters calls for a certain look. I just think this one complements the look we got going today, which is super soft and natural. So I definitely recommend this highlighter for all of you guys starting out with makeup. And this highlighter I like to apply using a fluffier brush, such as this one, and I like to just kind of squeeze it together first, like that, because it is so fluffy. And I like to squeeze it and kind of lay it down where I want it, which is right here first, to kind of like lay the color down. And then I like to let it go and then go over it and kind of like blend it out so that we don't have any harsh lines. I am also quickly gonna apply a little bit of that highlighter to my brow bone. It just gives your eyebrows a nice lifted appearance. I like to add a little bit to the tip of my nose. Of course, this is totally optional. We all have places we like to highlight and places we don't. Then the last thing, I like to just sit my eyebrows. Again, this is optional. It also depends on how much eyebrow product you have in your eyebrows. But the last thing that I like to do is just set my eyebrows in place so they don't move throughout the day. and I'm using a clear eyebrow gel. I'm just gonna let the powder sit for another 2 or 3 minutes or so. I'm not gonna bore you with that. I'm gonna then wipe it away using a big fluffy brush, and then I will be back. So yeah, you guys, this is the finished look. I hope that you liked it, and I hope that it was easy enough to follow. As always, if you like this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Other than that, have a great day or night wherever you guys are, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.